Welcome to a very sad episode of the Jampack Report today for October the 28th of 2020. Of course, my name is Samuel Adams, and today we're talking about something that I never thought that I would actually have to talk about yet again for a third time, but here we are. But if you do want to catch the hottest gaming news of the day, you can always find the show right here 5 days a week on youtube.com/SamuelAdamsMedia and on podcast services around the world, so subscribe and stay up to date. But let's face the music, let's go ahead and get down to brass tacks. Cyberpunk 2077 has been delayed yet again to December the 10th after going gold. Developer CD Projekt Red says it's still working on a launch day patch for the game, which was previously slated for November the 19th. It attributes the delay partly to its multi-platform release, which will see the game launch across 2 generations of console hardware, PC, and Google Stadia. Quote, "The biggest challenge for us right now is shipping the game on current gen, next gen, and PC at the same time, which requires us to prepare and test 9 versions of it," the company said in a tweet. "We need to make sure everything works well and every version runs smoothly. We're aware it might seem unrealistic when someone says 21 days can make any difference in such a massive and complex game, but they really do." Cyberpunk 2077 officially went gold, which means they locked down a release version of the game in early October, and the developers promised via Twitter that no more delays are happening. The release version is still finished, but CD Projekt Red has been developing further updates for the day of the game's release. Quote, "This is the time period we undercalculated," the tweet says, even after an unanticipated crunch period that has seen developers working overtime. Cyberpunk 2077 has been one of the most highly anticipated games of 2020, but with the latest delay, it's just going to be squeaking in at the end of the year. So, Cyberpunk 2077 gone yet again, pushed out one more time. First and foremost, of course, you have to do what you have to do to ensure that the game is running well across all platforms, and more importantly, that the developers have time to get these achievements completed, to finish working on the game. It's fine. It is what it is, and it's just a couple of more weeks. Quite frankly, that little time period within the month of November is very, very, very busy. We have new consoles, we have new games, we have tons of stuff releasing on that specific week alone, so I think we are all going to be okay, and we'll all make it through. Number 2, I've seen more reports of death threats going out to developers. Don't do that. Don't be that guy, because at the end of the day, this is just a video game. Everything that I talk about here on the Jampack Report has very little impact in real-world lives. Of course, people enjoy games, but ultimately, come on, this is all just entertainment and it's fun. Just take a step back. It's okay. You'll make it. Number 3, let's talk about what's actually happening here. I can't speak to anything fully because I don't work at CD Projekt Red, and a lot of the people that are sharing their thoughts online don't work at CD Projekt Red. Journalists have some insight into what's going on. Some friends have some insight into what is going on if they're associated with people that work at CD Projekt Red. I'm not in that group, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But it seems like for Cyberpunk 2077 and for CD Projekt Red, project management is an absolute mess. It feels like they continuously set these arbitrary release dates with promises that things will get done by these dates. Then whenever they fail to hit them because the expectations that they set are unrealistic, not only are fans disappointed, but there is disappointment within the studio, and it feels like a defeat. Something needs to change, because when you set these dates and continually push them out, it's doing nothing to help the fan base, and it's doing nothing to help your employee base. On top of that, there have been more reports coming out that we learned about the delay at the same time as many of the developers on the team learned about the delay. You shouldn't hear that your game is getting pushed out by a number of weeks via Twitter. That needs to be something that is shared and communicated internally. The more time goes by and the more reports come out, the more that it's clear something needs to change at CD Projekt Red. Especially after a game has gone gold, to come back and say that it's been delayed yet again, that's kind of unprecedented. I've seen a couple of people talking about NBA Live as a game that was going gold and then it was canceled. So of course there are examples of this happening in the past, but it seems like this was a very poorly managed project, and I say these things without factoring in COVID. COVID is something that's changed the way that people around the world are getting work done, and to launch a AAA game in the same pedigree as Cyberpunk 2077 while working remotely is something that has never been done before, so I'm sure there are unforeseen challenges. Again, that's why I say I can't speak to this fully. So those are my thoughts on it. I think that overall, the project is number 1, hard to manage, number 2, has been managed poorly, and number 3 will hopefully draw to a close so that the developers can get some, of course, number 1, revenue, because they deserve all of it since they have been working so diligently and so hard on finally finishing this project, but number 2, some time off to kind of recuperate and relax. It seems like there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I really hope that some investigative reporting goes down to where we can finally learn more about what's happening. Of course, again, it's none of our business, but still, very strange to see that the game has been delayed yet again. Still looking forward to it, still have my pre-order locked in, and honestly, like I said, that just gives players more time to dive into games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Watch Dogs Legion, so many others that are launching during the course of that first couple of weeks of November on their Xbox Series X, the S, and the PlayStation 5. Of course, yesterday, on top of that news, we did get earnings from both Microsoft and Sony. We'll start with the Xbox head. Xbox is doing great heading into the launch of the Xbox Series X and S consoles in November. Microsoft announced its earnings for the July to September period, and Xbox was a bright spot. Gaming revenue rose year over year by $550 million, or 22%, due in part to increased spending on games and services. The Content and Services Department of Xbox specifically saw its revenue rise by 30%, which works out to a whopping $649 million increase. This growth was driven in part by third-party games, Microsoft said, though it did not mention any by name. As a platform holder, Microsoft gets a 30% cut of every game sold on Xbox, and with games overall flourishing right now during COVID-19, Microsoft is making big profits. The growth was also fueled by an increase in Xbox Game Pass subscriptions along with first-party game sales. It was not all sunshine and rainbows, however, as Xbox hardware sales dropped by 27% due to fewer systems being sold. That makes sense given that the Xbox One is many years into its life cycle and the Xbox Series X and S consoles are right around the corner. So people may be holding off on purchasing a new Xbox right now. Xbox is just one division of Microsoft, of course. Overall, Microsoft is crushing it right now, with the company posting revenue of $37.2 billion, up 12% for the period, and a profit of $13.9 billion, up 30%. Microsoft recently dug into its bank account to pay $7.5 billion to acquire ZeniMax and its subsidiary Bethesda. The deal has not officially gone through, which is why Phil Spencer is limited in what he can say about the acquisition. Of course, next quarter is going to be monstrous, with Xbox Series X and S consoles both launching on November the 10th, priced at $500 and $300 respectively. Now moving on to PS4 reports and, of course, PlayStation figures. PS4 hardware sales continue to decline, but software remains the king. Sony has announced this morning the results of its second quarter for fiscal year 2020. The period covering July to September saw sales of PS4 slow down, but was nonetheless record-setting in revenue for PlayStation. The console has now shipped 113.6 million units worldwide since its introduction in late 2013. The actual sold-to-consumer figure is likely lower, of course, but that is already an impressive record for PS4. You may notice that this is roughly 1.5 million increase over last quarter's results, which is typical of the end of the console cycle. Ps5 sales will soon become a metric Sony tracks in its quarterly reports, but until then, PS4 remains the flagship. 80.9 million software sales were made over the quarter, with Sony's first-party games amounting to 12.4 million of these. Digital continues to grow, now making up 59% of all software sales. Overall, PlayStation made $4.9 million in revenue, which, although down compared to the previous quarter, is up significantly over the same quarter last fiscal year. So we see this trend continuing, and we've seen it over the course of the entire pandemic, where these late life cycle reports for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One are way ahead of where they should be in terms of software because of the ongoing pandemic. People are still not wanting to go out. People are still often encouraged to stay in their homes depending on where they are in the world. And so, of course, with the US seeing its third spike in COVID cases, I think that this holiday season with the new consoles is really going to see probably one of the biggest boosts possible, because more and more people are staying home to stay safe and to enjoy some games. And that includes me for the most part. And so looking ahead, I think that the next quarter is going to be it's just going to blow everybody's mind how many of these consoles are sold and how many games are sold as well. But in terms of Xbox right now, still very impressive, because you have to consider where the console began at the start of its life, all the way back in 2013. It really came a long way, and it has made some incredible strides to become a legitimate location that people want to go to play games. The Xbox One did not really have that much appeal when it launched. Of course, it still had good games, but compared to the PlayStation 4, nobody really wanted to be there. Now, even in its current state, with the Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro, the Xbox One X is still technically the more powerful hardware. It is more backward compatible than the PlayStation 4, and more people are wanting to play it because of things like Game Pass that do include third-party games and first-party games. So that's very exciting as well. And going into it, I am absolutely 100% unashamed to say that I'm more excited about what the Xbox Series X is going to bring to the table currently than the PlayStation 5. Not to say that I'm more excited for, the future of gaming overall, but overall, definitely looking forward to seeing what Xbox has up its sleeve, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of the PS4 hardware sales, that is not shocking again to see them decline, but the software is continuing to grow as well. Now, in terms of its first-party games, that is something that is very impressive. 12.4 million of the 80.9 million were Sony first-party games. Of course, this year you have seen some very, very important titles. You have stuff like The Last of Us Part 2, you have stuff like Ghost of Tsushima, and with the next generation supporting Game Boost, you do have a lot of people that are wanting to get their hands on these games to play it ahead of the new console, but on top of that, to prepare for the next console. I'm not sure if I'm going to be getting a PlayStation 5 this year. I have a PlayStation 4 Pro that I'm thinking about trading in so I can get a couple of $100 off, and I can kind of offset the cost of a new PlayStation, so that might be something I end up doing in the next few weeks. But I have been waiting to play Ghost of Tsushima because I feel like it's a game that I want to see at its highest quality. And of course, it's not on PC, it's better to be played on the PlayStation 5. So I think this is going to continue, and it is nice to see that they are supporting these last-gen games, and I think that will continue to shoot software sales into the sky. So we'll see how these go, but hey, both of these companies are doing very well right now, and it is a great time to be into video games. Now, speaking of the PlayStation 5, Sony says pre-order demand has been very high. Quote, the demand as expressed by the level of pre-order has been very considerable, Sony's gaming boss told Reuters. According to Jim Ryan, the company took as many PlayStation 5 pre-orders in the first 12 hours in the US as it did in the first 12 weeks for PS4. Ryan said Sony is working as hard as ever we can to meet demand, but that it may well be that not everybody who wants to buy a PlayStation 5 on launch day will be able to find one. Sony is gearing up to launch PlayStation 5 on November the 12th in the US, Japan, Canada, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, and on November the 19th in the rest of the world. Multiple retailers sold out of PlayStation 5 pre-orders just hours after launch details were announced on September the 16th, despite Sony telling fans that pre-sales for the console would begin the following day. PlayStation subsequently apologized for the troubled PlayStation 5 pre-order launch and promised to release more consoles to retailers imminently. Selected retailers opened a second wave of PS5 pre-orders on September the 25th, which also sold out quickly. Retailers Amazon and Shop2 have informed some PS5 pre-order customers that they will not receive the console in time for launch, while Ireland's GameStop chain has told some customers it won't be able to fulfill their pre-orders until 2021. The PlayStation 5 is priced at $500 for the standard edition and $400 for the digital edition, with the only difference being the former's inclusion of a disc drive. Ryan recently said Sony expects PS5 sales to clear 7 million units by the end of its fiscal year on March 31st, 2021, outperforming PS4's launch. An embargo on PS5 coverage lifted earlier today. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but these pre-orders are very, very strong, and this is the point that I want to make here. According to Ryan, the company took as many PS5 pre-orders in the first 12 hours in the US as it did in the first 12 weeks for the PlayStation 4. There's a lot that goes into this. Of course, over the past 7 to 8 years, you have seen a growth in gaming in a way that you didn't really see in the same capacity in the previous generation. It has become almost an expectation that you have some kind of gaming console. It's not really a, shameful thing to have a gaming console anymore, or a nerdy thing. It's just kind of something that people do, especially now during this COVID period that we're all living through. Games are kind of an escape for a lot of people. And so to have a console is something that a lot of people want. And so to see this fact that as many PS5 pre-orders were given out in the first 12 hours, that was the same amount as the first 12 weeks of pre-orders for the PlayStation 4, that's interesting. It's also unique to consider the fact that we haven't had 12 weeks of pre-orders for the PlayStation 5. That's just not going to be a factor in this upcoming cycle. So perhaps there was this kind of pent-up anticipation that made a lot of purchasing decisions very fast, and it kind of gave this incentivization to go ahead and jump on board since you could, because it was such a highly sought-after item. But the PlayStation 5 is going to sell incredible amounts, and it is also absolutely massive. Journalists have finally been able to compare PS5's size to other consoles. At more than 15 inches wide, the PS5 hardware is Sony's biggest console to date. A new video from GameXplain, places a retail PS5 next to PS4 Pro, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One X, and more, showing exactly how Sony's sizable next-gen machine compares to already available console hardware. In a separate article, The Verge compares PS5 to the Xbox Series X, showing that Sony's next-gen console is indeed slightly larger than its rival. Slightly is a bit of an understatement. While the PS4 towers over the Xbox Series X when stood vertically, it is thinner when you lay it down, the publication said. That will mean you can slot the PS5 into TV stands where you can't squeeze an Xbox Series X. At more than 15 inches wide, the PS5 hardware is Sony's biggest console to date and larger than even its next-gen rival, the Xbox Series X. Tori Yasuhiro, the head of the PlayStation 5's mechanical and thermal design team, recently told Japanese publication Nikkei that PlayStation 5's large cooling fan is what determined the console's overall size. At 45mm tall, even the PlayStation 5's cooling fan is thicker than a standard PlayStation 4, as demonstrated in an official PS5 teardown video released last week. Yasuhiro explained in an interview that a large fan was required in order to cool both sides of a PS5's main board equally. The engineer claimed that the PlayStation 5 console could have been smaller in size if Sony had opted to install two smaller cooling fans instead of one for each side of the console. It was possible to develop the PlayStation 5 to be smaller, for example by implementing two cooling fans, one for side A and side B. The PlayStation 5 size would have been reduced, Yasuhiro said. However, there is naturally an additional cost associated with having two fans. Additionally, controlling the functionality of two fans is more difficult than just one. With these additional obstacles in mind, we decided to cool both sides of the main board with one large fan, end quote. So if you want to check out the entire video from GameXplain, you can absolutely do that. And overall, this is an absolute unit. Of course, this is the unit itself, but there it is next to a PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, I will say, looking at the PlayStation 4 Pro, that is a massive console. I'm not sure how many people understand the fact that the PlayStation 4 Pro is a pretty big, wide situation. Like it is very long right here, like it goes back a good long way, but it's also just a pretty massive console. And so continuing on, you see it laying on its side next to an original launch day PlayStation 4. Up on its side, you have the Xbox Series X, which of course is a pretty mainline, streamlined console. But these give you an idea of exactly what to expect when it comes to the size of the PlayStation 5. One thing that is worth mentioning, here you see it sitting on a TV stand. It is literally covering up a portion of the television that is mounted a very good long ways above the TV stand here. And you see a light switch here just for an additional level of measurement. But man, what a sizable little console this one is. It is just absolutely massive. Here you have a launch day PS4, a Pro, Series X, and a GameCube, and it's still got about 3 inches of space. Man, Absolutely massive. Now, one thing that I have heard going around is that the plastic on it is sort of flimsy. On top of that, it's not as white as you would first expect. I have heard it has more of a gray tint to it, which sounds actually more intriguing to me because I'm a big fan of the PlayStation 1. So, looking at all these facts, I'm looking forward to the second revision of the PlayStation 5 more so than I am this launch version, because I hope that maybe as CPU cost goes down, maybe as cooling cost goes down, maybe as RAM cost declines, you will be able to see the funds that go into a PlayStation 5 version 2 get a bit reallocated to where you can have this dual fan design that Yasuhiro is talking about, and you can have a smaller machine. Because although the size of a machine does not matter, and of course you see me on Twitter poking fun at it, but ultimately when it comes down to it, the size of the machine does not matter. It's still an eyesore to have this giant, enormous console. It's very bold, it's striking, it is incredibly unique in its design, but it's also a bit much for my bachelor pad living room. And so it would be nice to have something that is going to be the equivalent of the generational transfer between the original PlayStation 2 and the PS2 Slim, where you have literal just inches shaved off of the overall size of the console, and I hope that's what happens here. Because I've heard that the base itself, where you see the disk drive down towards the bottom, is incredibly heavy, while the top is incredibly light in comparison to the overall size of the console. I believe it weighs in at about 9.9 pounds versus the Xbox Series X being 9.6, so take that information as you will. Ultimately, they're pretty close to each other, where the PlayStation 5 has height, the Xbox Series X has girth. That's kind of the situation there as well. But ultimately, again, like I said, the look of the consoles don't matter. It's about how they run games, and it's about how the games play. And it sounds like they're going to be playing very, very well. Now, to round out today's show, a bit of a disappointing news story, because I saw this headline and I got very excited. On Twitter, they said, Uplay Plus is now Ubisoft Plus, a multi-platform service. Then I realized that that doesn't mean consoles. Ubisoft Plus is the new game of Uplay Plus, the Ubisoft's game subscription service on PC. The name Uplay is being phased out, of course, with the recent announcement that Uplay is becoming Ubisoft Connect. The big change for Ubisoft Plus, however, is that it's becoming a multi-platform service. Subscribing on one platform gets you access to the same library on other supported platforms. In this case, a PC subscription, the only platform where Ubisoft Plus is currently available, will unlock the same benefits on Google Stadia and Amazon Luna. Okay. A beta for Ubisoft Plus on Luna is coming on November the 10th, which is also when the rebranding will occur on PC. Assuming you have access to Luna by that point, you'll also be able to play the Ubisoft Plus PC library at no additional charge. A similar bonus is coming to Stadia by the end of the year, and it will not require a Stadia Pro subscription. This is a big change for Stadia, which has so far only sold big games directly and offered smaller ones for free as part of Stadia Pro. And now that we know that games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Immortals Fenyx Rising support cross-platform saves, you will be able to use the same game save across PC, Stadia, and Luna. Ubisoft Plus is a $15 per month subscription service available only on PC through Ubisoft Connect, formerly Uplay, at this time. It is similar to EA Play Pro in that it includes all of the publisher's games on PC, including new titles as they are released. So if you do want to dive into Ubisoft Plus, of course, this is a great way to get all of the Ubisoft games immediately day and date on PC. Hopefully this is something that eventually comes to consoles, but the word doubtful comes to mind because of the amount of money that would cost Ubisoft. Ultimately, I don't think that their games have enough appeal to warrant a $15 per month subscription. Because I'm thinking about the games that I play from Ubisoft, and ultimately it comes down to occasionally, and I mean very occasionally, Rainbow Six Siege, which is now included in an Xbox Game Pass. On top of that, I play maybe one Assassin's Creed game when it comes out, and even then, that's like 1 week and I grind it, and then I'm pretty good to go after that. Watch Dogs is kind of a hit or miss for me, not really looking forward to Legion. It's going to be the big next-gen launch game, but ultimately still kind of on the fence about it. Thinking more about the oldies like Beyond Good and Evil. That's something that is cool, but I still have those on PC. So I don't know that it really brings the value that it needs for me to dish out $15 per month, but ultimately, Some people out there are hardcore Ubisoft fans, and of course, if you do want to check out these streaming services, you certainly can. Luna, of course, is Amazon's new service that is going to be having channels, which are essentially going to be independent subscriptions you can get. Seems kind of like a Stadia, but maybe a little bit better. We'll see how it works. I haven't had a chance to get my hands on it, and of course, it is a little bit different than Stadia in its pricing, but we have talked about that on a previous episode of the Jampack Report. So that is what's happening with Ubisoft Plus, and that is a conclusion to today's episode of the Jampack Report. If you enjoyed today's show, drop me a like down below and let me know what games and stories caught your eye today. But specifically, what do you think about Cyberpunk 2077 being delayed until December the 10th? I would love to hear your thoughts. Love is a strong word. But until tomorrow, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon, and peace.